Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The world of Harry Potter is full of darkness, but one of its brightest embodiments of evil is undoubtedly Lord Voldemort. His name inspired fear, his actions caused chills. But if we dig a little deeper, we might find that not everything about the Dark Lord's behavior was as logical as it seemed. At times, his plans were less brilliant strategy and more bizarre and baffling chaos. Today, we're diving into Voldemort's most questionable decisions to ask, was he really that great a villain? Let's find out. Number 1. His careless treatment of horcruxes. The Dark Lord sought immortality and found a way to get it. Splitting his soul into fragments via horcruxes sounds like a wickedly clever idea, but the way he carried it out raises serious questions. With a unique opportunity to hide parts of his soul forever, Voldemort did a poor job. One horcrux he left in Hogwarts, a school filled with hundreds of curious children. Another was stored in Gringotts, a bank known for being targeted by intruders. Hello, Harry, Ron, and Hermione. Yet another ended up in the House of Black. And each horcrux was something special. Slytherin's locket, Ravenclaw's diadem, Hufflepuff's cup. A bit too flashy, wouldn't you say? A true mastermind would have hidden them in plain sight, inside a child's toy, a random rock, or an empty teapot. But Voldemort, it seems, was so obsessed with grandeur that even his soul had to live inside jewelry. Number 2, a purity obsession from a half-blood. Tom Riddle prided himself on his Slytherin lineage and believed only pure bloods were worthy of magic. He despised mudbloods and promoted the cult of blood purity among the Death Eaters. But Tom Riddle was a half-blood himself. How did that even work in his mind? He was the son of a witch and a muggle, and yet wanted to purge the world of people just like him. His entire ideology was built on a lie. Did any of his followers ever stop to wonder why they were following a leader who didn't even meet their own ideals? There's no logic. Just fanatical delusion wrapped in a neat package. Number 3, why didn't Voldemort possess someone else? After the events with Quirrell, it became clear Voldemort can live inside other people's bodies. He literally sat on the back of a professor's head for a year. It gave him a temporary form, access to magic, and the ability to operate in the real world. So here's the question, why didn't he do it again? After Philosopher's Stone, he went back to being a floating spirit. Why not possess another loyal Death Eater? Why not repeat a plan that had already worked? No answers, just guesses. Maybe Voldemort was too proud to be anyone's shadow again. He had to be the center of attention. Or nothing. Number 4, what was Voldemort doing? When Voldemort wasn't possessing people, he was apparently waiting. He vanished for years, only to suddenly pop back into the story. Between Philosopher's Stone and Goblet of Fire, silence. Then suddenly, I'm back. What was he doing that whole time? Meditating, writing a memoir, or just failing to find a body that suited him? Even after his return, in Order of the Phoenix and Half-Blood Prince, he acts sporadically. One day his goal is to kill Harry, the next it's to take over the Ministry, and the day after he fades into the background while Harry practices kissing Ginny. Seriously, for the greatest dark wizard of the age, he sure takes a lot of breaks. Number 5. The overly complicated Goblet of Fire plan. He needs a body. He needs Harry's blood. He has Barty Crouch Jr., who can get close to Harry every single day for an entire school year. Sounds simple enough, right? But Voldemort goes full quest mode. He rigs the Tri-Wizard tournament, manipulates each trial, watches Harry's progress, and finally uses a portkey to drag him to a graveyard. Couldn't he just take a blood sample while Harry slept? This is like choosing to sail around the world in a canoe just to deliver a text message when you could have just picked up a phone. Number 6. The unbreakable vow. Voldemort demands total loyalty. Even the slightest betrayal means death, but strangely he never uses the most effective, magical tool for ensuring obedience, the unbreakable vow. Snape makes such a vow to Narcissa Malfoy, so we know it works, we know it binds. But Voldemort, he prefers threats and fear, methods that clearly don't work on everyone. Snape played a double game for years. Peter Pettigrew betrayed him. Why not force every Death Eater to swear magically? It's the surest way to avoid betrayal. Or did the Dark Lord see himself as above such trivial precautions? Number 7, end-of-year attacks only. It's practically tradition. Every year, as soon as the students finish exams, Voldemort makes his grand entrance. Why never attack at the start of the year, or even during Christmas break? Did he respect the school calendar? Harry barely recovers from the last encounter before he gets to enjoy an entire school year in peace until the final month. It honestly feels like Voldemort booked the end-of-year slot ahead of time, like a theatre reserving space for opening night. Number 8. Making Nagini a horcrux. Voldemort loved Nagini, not just as a pet, but as a companion, a weapon, and eventually a horcrux. He hid a piece of his soul inside her, thinking it was brilliant, a creature that could strike and protect. But a snake is still flesh and blood. It breathes, eats, sleeps and dies. Even Bellatrix kept her vault locked. Voldemort, on the other hand, let Nagini slither at his feet, completely exposed. In Deathly Hallows, she follows him into the open, into danger. Nagini, come, he whispers again and again. He treats her like a guard dog, not like the fragile key to his immortality. And in the end, it costs him everything. Neville Longbottom, bleeding and burned, rises from the rubble of Hogwarts and draws the sword of Gryffindor. One strike, one hiss, and the last Horcrux dies. Voldemort doesn't even realize it at first. He's too busy watching Harry. But it was over the moment he let Nagini walk into battle. He could have hidden her, sent her away, protected her, but pride made him blind. And when the snake fell, so did the Dark Lord. Number 9. Disrespecting his own followers. Bellatrix. Lestrange worshipped him, Lucius Malfoy feared him. Wormtail followed him out of sheer desperation. These were Voldemort's inner circle, devoted, terrified, and constantly humiliated. In Deathly Hallows, he mocks Lucius in front of everyone. "You lost your wand? How careless," he says with a smile sharper than any curse. He doesn't reward loyalty. He punishes failure. Even when Draco risks everything to complete the mission in Half-Blood Prince, Voldemort answers not with praise but with more threats. That's not leadership. That's slow-burning sabotage. Fear can win a battle. It cannot win a war. The moment Voldemort disappeared after the first fall, his Death Eaters scattered. Even Bellatrix went into hiding. And when he returned, many came back not with loyalty, but with excuses. "We thought you were dead," they pleaded. That should have told him everything. No one died for him willingly. They died because they were trapped. In the final battle, loyalty cracked. Narcissa lied to save her son. Draco fled. Even Snape, his most useful pawn, served two masters. Voldemort ruled with cruelty and wondered why no one stood with him when it counted. Number 10. Misreading the prophecy. The prophecy spoke of a boy born at the end of July. Two fit the description, Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom, but Voldemort never paused to consider both. He chose Harry. Why? Because, like always, he saw a mirror, a half-blood, a child like himself. It was ego, not logic. He didn't investigate, didn't wait. He acted. In Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore says he chose the boy he thought most likely to be a danger to him. That one choice gave Harry power. "It was your heart that saved you," Dumbledore tells him later. But really, it was Voldemort's hand that built the path. By trying to prevent the prophecy, Voldemort made it real. He marked Harry as his equal. He gave him the scar, the connection, the reason. If he had ignored the prophecy, Harry might have grown up unnoticed. Neville might have become a gardener, not a hero. But Voldemort acted out of fear disguised as decisiveness. He created his own downfall. The prophecy didn't seal his fate. His belief in it did. Number 11. The foolish attack on Hogwarts. Voldemort stood at the edge of the Forbidden Forest, army at his back, convinced that fear would break the walls of Hogwarts. But this wasn't a fortress of stone, it was a home. Inside were not just students, but fighters, McGonagall conjuring galloping desks, Flitwick hurling charms like daggers, Sprout arming the walls with deadly plants, even Trelawney threw crystal balls. He knew who lived in that castle. He knew Dumbledore's legacy ran through every corridor. Yet he marched in, thinking brute force would win where centuries of magic stood in his way. "I do not want to spill any more magical blood," he said through the mouth of a dead student, but the lie bled through every word. He had the ministry, he had fear, he had control over most of the wizarding world. He could have tightened his grip, made Hogwarts irrelevant. Instead, he made it a symbol, the place where the Dark Lord came and failed. And when Neville Longbottom, yes, Neville, rose from the rubble and cut Nagini's head from her body, it wasn't just a tactical loss. It was a myth shattered. Voldemort gambled everything on one night. No backup plan, no retreat, just rage, arrogance, and a snake. And in the end, the castle stood. He didn't. Number 12, turning a blind eye to Harry's connection. Voldemort stood on the graveyard soil, wand raised, face triumphant. But something went wrong. When he cast the killing curse, his wand clashed with Harry's, not in destruction, but in song. Golden light connected them, priori incantatem, a rare magical event, a sign that their wands shared the same core, phoenix feather. "They will not work properly against each other," Ollivander once said. That alone should have made Voldemort pause, rethink, ask questions. But he didn't. He brushed it off like a trick of fate, never considering that something deeper was happening. He never questioned why fate kept tying him to this boy. The dreams were another clue, visions of snakes, corridors and doors. Harry felt Voldemort's rage, saw what he saw, heard what he heard. In Order of the Phoenix, he screams in his sleep. "He's got Mr. Weasley," he cries, waking the dormitory. Dumbledore knew something was wrong. Snape was ordered to teach occlumency, but Voldemort? He never asked himself how a schoolboy could tap into his mind, never wondered why his thoughts leaked like blood through broken glass. A true strategist would have seen the danger or the opportunity. Voldemort saw neither. He could have used the link, fed Harry lies, planted traps, but he was too proud, too sure that knowledge belonged only to him. When Harry entered his mind in Deathly Hallows and felt the joy of murder, Voldemort didn't question the invasion. He assumed control, and that pride cost him. The connection between them wasn't weakness, it was a key. One Voldemort refused to turn, and by the time he realized it, the door was already locked from the other side. Number 13, ignoring Dumbledore until it was too late. Voldemort feared Dumbledore, everyone knew it. Even Bellatrix whispered it behind her manic laughter. Yet for all his fear, Voldemort never once tried to face the headmaster directly. He avoided him, circled him, sent others to do his dirty work. In Half-Blood Prince, instead of attacking Dumbledore himself, he gave the task to a 16-year-old boy, Draco Malfoy. A child broken by pressure and threats was expected to kill the most powerful wizard of the age. Why? Because Voldemort didn't dare do it himself. Draco was never a killer. Dumbledore knew that. He stood calmly at the astronomy tower, wand lowered, and said, "Draco, Draco, you are not a killer." Voldemort must have known it too. Maybe that was the point. To punish Lucius by dooming his son, but even that cruelty was short-sighted. Dumbledore survived until Severus Snape took the shot Voldemort never had the courage to take. And even then, it was a move orchestrated by Dumbledore himself. Voldemort never controlled the board. He was playing checkers while Dumbledore played chess. In the Order of the Phoenix, the one time Voldemort came close to fighting Dumbledore, he retreated. Their duel in the Ministry of Magic is one of the most powerful in the series. Fire and water clashed, spells shattered marble, and Harry watched the two giants of magic collide, and yet, in the end, Voldemort fled. "You're a fool, Harry Potter," he snarled, vanishing into the darkness. He couldn't defeat Dumbledore, not then, not ever. And so he chose to ignore him, pretend he didn't matter, as if turning away from the sun could make it stop shining. That arrogance gave Dumbledore time to build the Order, time to discover the horcruxes, time to teach Harry the truth. Voldemort could have struck first. He had the power, the reach, the fear, but he wasted it. His greatest enemy stood in plain sight, and he looked the other way. Dumbledore's greatest weapon wasn't his wand, it was the enemy who kept postponing the war. And when Dumbledore finally died, it wasn't Voldemort's triumph. It was part of a plan the Dark Lord never saw coming. Number 14, failing to build stable alliances. During the Second Wizarding War, Voldemort had more than just witches and wizards to choose from. The magical world was full of powerful creatures, giants, werewolves, goblins and trolls, each group with its own grudges and pain. He could have turned them into loyal allies, but instead he ruled with fear, never with loyalty. Giants were lured into the war with promises, but Voldemort never truly respected them. He sent them to the front lines like mindless beasts. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Hagrid tells Harry that the giants joined up with you-know-who right after we left, but also explains that they only wanted to be left alone. They weren't evil, they were scared. Take Fenrir Greyback, the most infamous werewolf in the wizarding world. Voldemort used him like a dog on a leash. He never offered Greyback a seat at the table, just meat. Greyback wanted a world where werewolves weren't treated like animals. Voldemort never cared. He gave him free rein to bite and kill, but never once included him in any strategic decision. Even Bellatrix Lestrange looked down on him. In Half-Blood Prince, when Greyback joins the Death Eaters at the Malfoy Manor, Narcissa is horrified. "My son is not here to provide refreshments for werewolves," she snaps. That was Voldemort's circle, arrogant, cruel, and blind to long-term loyalty. Goblins, too, were a wasted opportunity. They controlled Gringotts. They knew the value of power, money, and security. But Voldemort stole from them. He hid a horcrux in Bellatrix's vault, showing not trust, but exploitation. In Deathly Hallows, Griphook is furious when he learns what Voldemort left there. "Wizards have always seen goblins as lesser beings," he says bitterly. Voldemort never even tried to change that view. He didn't offer the goblins gold or freedom, just threats and orders. That's not how you win a war, that's how you lose an empire. When the tide of battle turned, none of these creatures stood by him. They had no reason to. He used them, then cast them aside. He could have built an unstoppable coalition, but instead he built a ticking clock. The moment things got dangerous, his so-called allies vanished. Loyalty built on fear has an expiration date, and Voldemort never saw it coming. Number 15, the unnecessary murder of Lily Potter. Of all the moments that define the fall of Voldemort, none is more tragically puzzling than his choice to kill Lily Potter. On that infamous Halloween night in 1981, he had one clear mission: to eliminate the child named in the prophecy. And yet, despite his singular goal, he committed an act that defied both logic and self-preservation. He murdered Lily, a woman who posed no threat, who had no wand raised, who had already been offered a chance to step aside. Voldemort, the master of calculated cruelty, made an emotional, reckless choice. He could have spared her. He should have spared her. But he didn't. According to Severus Snape's tearful memories, those pulled from him as he lay dying on the floor of the Shrieking Shack, Lily had been given a choice. Voldemort told her to move aside. Snape had begged him for that much. "Don't kill her," Snape had pleaded. And Voldemort, though irritated by the request, had relented. He gave her the option to live. But when she refused to move, to abandon her son, he struck her down with the killing curse. It was an impulsive move, a flash of fury, a refusal to be defied. But was it necessary? No. And therein lies the tragedy and the idiocy of that fateful act. Lily was not armed. She was not a duelist, a threat, or a barrier. She was a mother. She had nothing in her hands but desperation, nothing in her voice but pleading. Voldemort, the most feared dark wizard in a century, faced a woman without a wand and still chose death as his only answer. He had ways, dozens of them, to incapacitate her. A stunning spell, a body-bind curse, even a simple shield charm to push her away. He was the most advanced practitioner of magic in Britain. His arsenal of spells was nearly endless, and yet he chose the one spell that meant permanence. The power of Lily's sacrifice, what Dumbledore would later describe as the old magic, was triggered not simply by her love, but by the act of giving her life when another choice was available. She wasn't taken by surprise. She wasn't slaughtered in crossfire. She was given the option to live and refused. This, paradoxically, was the trigger. It was not just the act of dying, but the conscious, deliberate act of protecting her child, even when it meant death. If Voldemort had stunned her or merely pushed her aside, the protection never would have taken hold. Harry would have died, and Voldemort might have ruled. Instead, Voldemort made the worst possible choice. He committed an act of murder that not only undermined his mission, but ensured his downfall. The irony is bitter. He was warned, he had options, and he ignored them all. In trying to be absolute, in refusing even the mercy of letting a defenseless woman live, he sowed the seeds of his own destruction. This wasn't just arrogance. It was short-sightedness. It was bad strategy, clothed in the rags of egotism. What makes the situation more maddening is Voldemort's obsession with prophecy. He had already chosen Harry over Neville Longbottom based on the boy's parentage, born to those who have thrice defied him. He believed he was acting to prevent his own defeat. Every move he made was supposed to ensure that outcome. And yet, with all that forethought, all that plotting, he made a completely avoidable mistake. He created the exact condition that allowed the child to survive, to become his undoing. Snape, upon learning of Lily's death, was devastated, not just because the woman he loved was gone, but because her death had been pointless. He had trusted Voldemort to honor his word, to allow Lily to live, but Voldemort, in the end, couldn't tolerate resistance, even in its gentlest form. Lily's refusal to step aside, even unarmed, was enough to justify her murder in his mind. It was pride. It was a petty, unstrategic indulgence in dominance, and it cost him everything. Voldemort prided himself on being above emotion. He mocked love, belittled mercy, and dismissed grief as weakness. Yet in that moment it was his own inability to tolerate defiance that led him to act emotionally. He killed not for power, not for necessity, but for control. And it backfired. The killing curse, aimed at a child, rebounded, tearing his soul from his body. A spell meant to end the boy's life ended his own instead, and the ghost of that failure would haunt him for the next 17 years. Consider also the aftermath. Had Lily survived, Voldemort might still have fallen, perhaps by another means. But the symbolism of her death, the narrative it created, became a legend. Harry was not just the boy who lived, he was the child whose mother died to protect him. That protection became literal, magical armor, but it also became emotional steel. It gave Harry something to fight for, something to remember. Voldemort gave him that. In contrast, James's death had no such legacy. James died fighting. He stood in Voldemort's way with his wand out and was swiftly dispatched. There was no spell of protection, no ancient magic in his defense. His bravery was noble, but it did not alter the rules of magic. Lily's death did. Voldemort, for all his knowledge, failed to understand the power of that decision. He thought love was a weakness. He learned too late it was a weapon. Dumbledore explained it best in the first book. To have been loved so deeply, even though the person who loved us is gone, will give us some protection forever. That protection was carved into Harry's very blood, and again it was all Voldemort's doing, his refusal to accept mercy, to tolerate defiance. led him to destroy his own plans. He undermined his purpose in the name of control. Number 16. Overconfidence as a fatal flaw. Lord Voldemort believed himself invincible, the supreme architect of the magical world's future, and the inevitable conqueror of death. That belief, however, became the very flaw that unraveled him. It wasn't a curse or prophecy that destroyed the Dark Lord, it was his unchecked arrogance. His greatest mistake wasn't a failed spell or a poorly chosen ally, it was the unwavering belief that no one could outthink him, that no one could possibly predict his next move, and that no one but himself held any true power. This hubris blinded him to the most crucial details, caused him to overlook the simplest of truths, and ultimately left his legacy in ruins. When Voldemort created his horcruxes, he believed he was crafting immortality. He took comfort in the notion that dividing his soul into fragments and hiding them away would secure his invincibility. But he never considered that someone would find them, let alone understand them. He underestimated not only the intelligence of others, but also their determination. "If I die," he once said, "I will never truly be gone," an echo of his twisted faith in the permanence of his fragmented soul. Yet he never returned to check whether his horcruxes remained intact. He assumed their survival was guaranteed. He assumed wrong. There was nothing inherently magical about his decision to use a diary as a horcrux. It was a schoolboy's object, familiar and mundane. He didn't cloak it with powerful enchantments beyond the enchantment of the horcrux itself. He let it fall into Lucius Malfoy's hands, where it sat idly, waiting for a moment to strike. When Ginny Weasley nearly died from the diary's influence in the Chamber of Secrets, it was not part of Voldemort's grand design. It was an accident, a side effect, a miscalculation, but he never asked about it, never cared that a piece of his soul had been discovered and destroyed. He didn't even realize it was gone until the final confrontation. The Dark Lord's inability to recognize the loss of his horcrux is not just a detail, it is a symptom. He viewed them as indestructible, not worth worrying over. After all, who would dare to challenge him? Who would be smart enough to understand the concept of horcruxes, let alone hunt them down? He saw himself as a god among mortals, beyond understanding, beyond reach. This belief was a fantasy, one that Dumbledore systematically deconstructed in silence. Even in his interpretation of the prophecy, Voldemort demonstrated this fatal overconfidence. He heard only what he wanted to hear. When Sybil Trelawney uttered her fateful words, Voldemort latched onto the threat but missed the wisdom. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. She never named Harry. The prophecy did not demand that Harry be his downfall. Voldemort chose Harry. He marked him as his equal, and in doing so he ensured the fulfillment of a destiny that might otherwise have withered in ambiguity. Dumbledore, in contrast, listened. He waited. He understood that power was not the same as force, and that knowledge wielded with care often outlasted might. He groomed Harry not to fight magic with magic, but to challenge Voldemort's assumptions. Where Voldemort cast spells, Dumbledore asked questions. Where Voldemort demanded loyalty, Dumbledore earned it. Where Voldemort buried his soul to survive, Dumbledore looked to the soul to find truth. The battle at the Department of Mysteries stands as another testament to Voldemort's blindness. He believed the prophecy was a weapon. He sent his Death Eaters to retrieve it as though its physical possession would seal his fate or save him from it. He failed to see that knowledge was not contained in orbs. He did not grasp that the moment he acted on the prophecy, he breathed life into it. Neither can live while the other survives. The line haunted him, not because it was powerful, but because he believed it was. Voldemort trusted no one, which sounds like wisdom in the face of betrayal, but in his case it was self-sabotage. He surrounded himself with sycophants, people like Bellatrix Lestrange, who loved him to the point of madness, and Lucius Malfoy, who feared him more than death. Yet he never saw the weakness in their loyalty. He mocked Severus Snape's duplicity, but never saw the danger in his apparent devotion. He praised Draco Malfoy's pure bloodline, while ignoring the boy's trembling hands and broken spirit. Voldemort did not recognize people's internal worlds, only their utility to him. Even when faced with Dumbledore's army, a group of teenagers learning defensive spells in secret, Voldemort laughed. He didn't understand that resistance could begin with whispers and grow into roars. He underestimated Neville Longbottom, who would one day destroy Nagini. He underestimated Luna Lovegood, whose unshakable belief in unseen truths mirrored Dumbledore's quiet faith in the intangible. He underestimated Ron Weasley's loyalty and Hermione Granger's intellect. Most of all, he underestimated Harry's capacity for love. In the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort walked into the castle like a king returning to his palace. He sent his army forward, assumed the fight was already his. He expected Harry to fall for the defenders to scatter. When Harry willingly entered the Forbidden Forest, Voldemort believed it was over. But what he saw as surrender was strategy. What he saw as weakness was sacrifice. And sacrifice has a magic even Voldemort never understood. Dumbledore's plan, fragile, intricate, brilliant, relied on trust, not control. He allowed Snape to carry secrets no one else knew. He trusted Harry to walk into death. He believed in redemption, even in those who had done evil. Voldemort believed in none of this. He believed in domination, not cooperation. In his mind, love was a lie, mercy was a weakness, and fear was strength. And so he lost, not to magic, but to meaning. Number 17, repeating the same killing curse. In the shadowy stillness of the Forbidden Forest, Voldemort stood before the boy who had haunted his soul and splintered his plans for nearly 2 decades. Harry James Potter, unarmed and unprotected, had stepped willingly into the lion's mouth. There were no tricks, no decoys, no hidden allies. It was just a boy, alone, gazing up at the most feared wizard in living memory. Here lay Voldemort's ultimate triumph, the final breath before absolute domination. And yet, even at the apex of his supposed wisdom and power, he chose to repeat the same fatal mistake, the killing curse. This moment, so ripe with dramatic potential, became the symbol of Voldemort's deepest flaw, his inability to learn from failure. He had used Avada Kedavra once before on the same boy, and it had backfired in a spectacular fashion, rebounding upon him with catastrophic consequences. The scar it left on Harry's forehead became a living symbol of resistance. But Voldemort, possessed by a mind soaked in arrogance and a soul cracked by his own rituals, could not fathom the lesson staring him in the face. He had been defeated by love once, and he convinced himself it had been a fluke. He had not changed his methods. He had not evolved. When he pointed his wand at Harry for the second time, he used the same curse, spoken in the same cold, calculated manner. Avada Kedavra. The green light flashed again, just as it had in Godric's Hollow, just as it had when he killed James and Lily. But this time, Voldemort believed there would be no mistake. He thought that by stripping Harry of every protection, the wand, the blood bond, the guardianship of others, he had erased the variables that caused his previous failure. In his mind, he had cleaned the board. But Voldemort misunderstood magic in the most dangerous way. He viewed it as static, not as something living and reactive. Magic, in J.K. Rowling's world, rewards intention, sacrifice, and love. Voldemort, who never loved, never sacrificed, and saw intention only through the lens of domination, was blind to its deeper mechanics. The protection Lily Potter gave her son had not been a one-time shield. It was a living enchantment, woven through the very blood that now also ran in Voldemort's veins. Dumbledore once warned, "He took your blood believing it would strengthen him. He took into himself a tiny bit of the enchantment he had come to destroy." Voldemort failed to recognize that he had made Harry's survival more likely by anchoring the boy to his own life. But even if we ignore the blood magic and ancient protections, the logic behind Voldemort's choice remains baffling. Here he stood, the Dark Lord himself, with unlimited access to a vast and deadly repertoire of spells. He had seen Dumbledore conjure fire so fierce in the Horcrux cave that it seemed alive. He had used magic himself that could disintegrate objects, command inferi, or cause catastrophic damage. And yet, in this pivotal moment, he fell back on a spell that had already failed against this boy. Not once did he consider Fiendfire, not once did he consider the Cruciatus until death, not once did he summon magical fire, ice, or the 1,000 other avenues available to the most powerful dark wizard in the world. The only explanation, disturbingly simple, is Voldemort's fatal hubris. He believed himself invincible. He believed the problem had never been the spell, but the circumstances. He saw the killing curse not as a weapon, but as a signature. It was the mark of his reign, the punctuation to his dominance. He had to use it because, in his mind, it was the only way to properly conclude the prophecy. Neither can live while the other survives. He thought the finality of those words demanded the curse that had written his name in history. Voldemort never questioned whether prophecy was flexible, or if he was the one shaping its outcomes by clinging so desperately to it. He treated the prophecy like a script, not realizing he was improvising the entire time. When Snape brought him news of the prophecy, he acted on it, not because it forced his hand, but because he believed it justified his obsession. He chose Harry as the target. He chose to act first, and in doing so he gave the prophecy its shape. In the forest, with Harry standing before him, Voldemort once again followed the script he thought he controlled, never realizing the stage was collapsing under his feet. The tragedy of Voldemort is that he was brilliant but unimaginative. He could master the most complex curses, manipulate the minds of legions, split his soul into 7 parts, and yet he could not comprehend that sometimes repetition is not power. When Bellatrix tortured Neville's parents, she did not use Avada Kedavra. She used the Cruciatus curse, slowly, repeatedly, devastatingly. She destroyed them without killing them. Voldemort himself had used legilimency to drive victims into madness. But none of this occurred to him in the forest. He defaulted to what he knew, to the performance of murder rather than its effectiveness. Number 18, ignoring Muggle technology and knowledge. Lord Voldemort, the most feared dark wizard of the modern era, prided himself on cunning, manipulation, and ruthlessness. He spent years orchestrating a return to power, building alliances, creating horcruxes, and studying ancient magic. Yet, in a world increasingly interconnected and observed, he never once showed interest in the dominant species of Earth, Muggles, and the systems they had built. His obsessive hatred blinded him to a truth that could have tipped the war in his favor. His failure to even consider Muggle technology and knowledge was not only a philosophical flaw, it was a fatal strategic mistake. For a man obsessed with immortality, Voldemort never showed any curiosity about how the majority of humans, the Muggles, extended their lives or preserved their power. He dismissed entire scientific systems, medicine, biology, surveillance, and communications. While magical healing was superior in many cases, there were areas in which Muggle science was ahead, especially in terms of organization and documentation. Yet Voldemort made no effort to learn how Muggles operated hospitals, governments, or militaries. If the Dark Lord had understood the significance of such structures, he could have exploited them easily. After all, the Muggle world had far less protection from magic than it did from nuclear arms. It is astonishing to think that Voldemort, who carefully plotted his return by infiltrating the Ministry of Magic, never thought to plant agents in Muggle governments. Not a single Death Eater posed as a police officer, intelligence agent, or doctor. The United Kingdom, in particular, was ripe for manipulation. The Statute of Secrecy protected the Muggle population from knowing about magical beings, but Voldemort wasn't bound by the same moral compass. He could have erased records, manipulated news, or caused chaos without firing a spell. Muggle institutions run on trust and bureaucracy, two things easily twisted by magic if only he had cared enough to look. It is telling that when Voldemort took over the wizarding world, his changes were crude and symbolic: blood status registries, biased education, and fear-mongering in the press. But he showed no understanding of systems management or infrastructure. Compare this to Grindelwald, who at least understood propaganda, international movements, and the value of symbolism. Voldemort's brand was terror, but terror alone does not win wars. He could have taken lessons from dictators and surveillance states in the Muggle world, whose grip on society required neither magic nor wands, only cameras, files, and control of the airwaves. He ignored all of it. The Order of the Phoenix, for example, operated in secrecy. Their headquarters at number 12 Grimmauld Place was unplottable and protected by the Fidelius charm. But suppose a simple Muggle device, a camera hidden nearby, had been used to monitor comings and goings. The Fidelius prevents knowledge from being passed magically or verbally, but it does not erase physical evidence or eliminate digital recordings. Voldemort, in all his meticulous planning, never thought to study how Muggles store information. He underestimated the fact that a USB drive could reveal more than a captured auror under Veritaserum. When the Ministry fell, Voldemort did not take steps to disable or monitor Muggle communication systems. He didn't cut off phone lines, intercept mail, or monitor television broadcasts. He remained willfully ignorant of mass communication. The Second Wizarding War erupted in a United Kingdom filled with cell towers, satellite feeds, and CCTV cameras, and yet Voldemort behaved as if nothing had changed since 1945. His plan to dominate the magical world never accounted for the 67 million people living in the country who weren't magical, but who held enormous power. There is no indication that Voldemort even knew how a car worked. Arthur Weasley, a man ridiculed for his obsession with Muggle gadgets, had more insight into the modern world than the Dark Lord ever did. The enchantments Arthur placed on the Ford Anglia allowed it to fly, turn invisible, and behave semi-sentiently. Imagine what a Death Eater with that knowledge could have done. Enchanted drones, invisible surveillance, disinformation campaigns. None of this required reinvention, only integration. But Voldemort disdained such dirty knowledge. He believed that magic made everything else obsolete. Voldemort's arrogance is perhaps best encapsulated in his assumption that the wizarding world was isolated and permanent. He saw Muggles as irrelevant, yet the magical economy depended on the Muggle one. Spells like apparition and portkeys had limitations, and the trace could be manipulated. But electricity, digital data, and mass transit had no such vulnerabilities. He never sought to understand how the Muggle world maintained order or power, though its reach was vast. Instead of breaking into databases or hijacking power grids, he sent Dementors after children and burned down homes. One of the most glaring omissions in Voldemort's campaign was the failure to exploit media. The Daily Prophet was a target he easily manipulated through fear, but never once did he attempt to hijack Muggle broadcasts. A televised threat, a hacked emergency alert, or even a digitally circulated video of his resurrection could have sent mass panic through both magical and Muggle society. He could have made himself known as a force beyond the confines of Diagon Alley. But the idea that Muggles could be useful never entered his mind, and so he faded into myth even as he spread chaos. Consider this: Severus Snape lived among Muggles as a child, so did Tom Riddle. Yet, instead of maintaining that familiarity, they cast it aside. Snape at least understood the nuances of both worlds, but Voldemort severed the connection entirely. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore says, "You are forgetting the most important thing, that Tom Riddle was once a boy who lived in a Muggle orphanage." That memory, that understanding, could have given Voldemort an edge. He had walked among them, he had seen the systems, but he rejected them all in his pursuit of magical purity. When Voldemort entered the Ministry of Magic through the Statue of Magic is Might, he could have taken a short walk and found himself in the heart of London's surveillance network. Instead, he remained in the shadows, using magical means to achieve ends that were increasingly outdated. Ironically, Muggles have entire institutions, MI5, MI6, GCHQ, designed for detecting covert threats. Had he infiltrated them, Voldemort might have gained access to intelligence far beyond what Death Eaters could provide. But again, he dismissed it, believing that magic was the only force worth fearing. What's worse, Voldemort never adapted. Even as his horcruxes fell and Harry's allies gained ground, he did not rethink his approach. He sent Nagini into battles, trusted only magical eyes, and used spells as his primary method of communication. No encryption, no redundancy, no networks. If Hermione Granger, a Muggle-born, could use a simple beaded bag to carry an entire base of operations, what might a Muggle engineer have contributed to the cause of darkness had Voldemort not seen them as filth? His disdain reached absurdity when he targeted the Muggle-born Registration Commission. He viewed those with non-magical parents as inherently inferior, yet these were often the most adaptable witches and wizards. Hermione, Lily Evans, and even Colin Creevey demonstrated intelligence and creativity honed in the Muggle world. Voldemort saw only bloodlines, not potential. His belief in magical aristocracy blinded him to the advantages of cross-cultural learning. In a war, refusing to know your enemy is not just arrogance, it's incompetence. A telling moment occurs in Deathly Hallows when Voldemort breaks into the Ministry and visits the Department of Mysteries. He does not linger. He shows no interest in the Muggle-borns detained there. He seeks power in relics and prophecy, not in understanding. Meanwhile, Hermione had a handbag filled with books, medicines, tools, and a radio, all Muggle-made or Muggle-inspired. That radio, which they used to listen to the Resistance, became a lifeline. Voldemort could have tracked it. He never did. The signal might have led him to the trio. He never tried. Even during the Battle of Hogwarts, Voldemort underestimated the power of knowledge. He believed brute force and terror would suffice. He ignored the Room of Requirement, a magical space responsive to thought and intention, much like Muggle technology shaped by design. The final battle included enchanted suits of armor, magical statues, and spells from first years. But had the castle been rigged, with basic sensors or traps informed by Muggle engineering, Voldemort's army would have faced a fortress, not a school. Again, opportunity wasted. Bellatrix Lestrange, his most loyal follower, mirrored his disdain. When captured by Hermione in Malfoy Manor, she screamed in fear, not because of a weapon, but because Hermione had taken her wand. Not one Death Eater ever used a radio, a lockpick, or even night vision goggles. They moved like ghosts, depending on fear and magic. But Muggles had created night vision cameras, motion detectors, biometric sensors. None of these can be fooled by an invisibility cloak if they are used properly. Voldemort's army was not just evil, it was outdated. He controlled the Forbidden Forest, the Dementors, and even the Giants, but he never sought to control the air. Muggle aircraft fly above Hogwarts every day. They map the Earth, scan terrain, and capture images in high resolution. Voldemort never asked what they might see from above. A single drone flight could have revealed more about Order hideouts than months of interrogations. But that kind of curiosity requires humility, and Voldemort had none. Dumbledore once told Harry, "It is our choices that show what we truly are." Voldemort's choices reflected a man bound by hate and blindness. He chose to ignore the world's dominant population, despite being born of it. He chose to scorn systems that could have made him unstoppable, and he chose ultimately to wage war with a mind stuck in the past, even as the present moved on without him. The tragedy of Voldemort is not just that he was evil, but that he was small. He had vision, but no foresight. He had power, but no wisdom. He crafted horcruxes, but he could not conceive of hard drives. He feared death, but refused to learn from those who had learned to prolong life without magic. His greatest flaw was not in his soul splitting, but in his world shrinking. He saw only wizards. And blood The rest was dust. In the end, Voldemort lost not just to love, but to knowledge. He underestimated Lily, who came from the world he despised. He underestimated Hermione, whose muggle upbringing made her resourceful. And he underestimated the very world he could have ruled with ease had he only studied it. He scorned the 99%, and the 99% didn't even need to fight back. They merely watched, recorded, and carried on. Because Voldemort never looked at them, never planned for them, never feared them, and that, ultimately, is why he was defeated. Number 19. Underestimating the power of love. Voldemort stood at the pinnacle of power, a wizard feared by all and rivaled by none. He bent death to his will, tore his soul into fragments, and commanded legions of followers through terror and dominance. Yet, in all his brilliance, his carefully orchestrated manipulations, and the sheer scale of destruction he unleashed upon the world, there remained one simple truth. He lost. He lost to a child. He lost not because he lacked power, but because he lacked understanding. The one force he chose to ignore, dismissed, mocked, and scorned, was the very force that undid him. Love. The pure, selfless, illogical magic of love that Voldemort neither valued nor even acknowledged as real. From the very beginning, Voldemort's downfall was set in motion by an act of love he couldn't comprehend. Lily Potter's sacrifice was no ordinary death. She was offered a choice: to live if she let her son die. She refused. She begged for Harry's life and willingly gave her own in exchange. If there is one thing Voldemort cannot understand, it is love, Dumbledore later explained. And this wasn't sentimentality, it was fact. Lily's sacrifice left a magical protection so profound that even the killing curse, the most feared spell in existence, rebounded upon its caster. Harry survived not because he was special by birth, but because someone loved him enough to die for him. That single moment shattered Voldemort's grand plan and forced him into exile. Still, Voldemort learned nothing. When he returned to power, he mocked this kind of magic, treating it as sentimental nonsense. "Is it love again?" he sneered at Dumbledore's insistence on its strength. But this wasn't just arrogance, it was blindness. He had already faced the consequences of ignoring love once and barely survived. Yet he refused to consider that something so human, so selfless, could be stronger than death, cruelty, and control. He continued to see only two tools: fear and dominance. Everything else to him was weakness. His failure to understand love also blinded him to the true strength of Harry Potter. Voldemort saw Harry as an anomaly, a mistake in the system, a glitch in his plan. He never saw the boy as a threat because he believed Harry's power came from prophecy or luck. But it wasn't prophecy that shielded Harry through years of conflict. It was the bond he shared with his friends, the unyielding loyalty of Ron Weasley, the sharp brilliance of Hermione Granger, and the shared values that kept them together. Harry never fought alone because love made sure he never had to. Voldemort, who trusted no one, who manipulated and discarded his followers like pawns, never understood how dangerous loyalty could be when it was earned instead of demanded. Even when facing death, Voldemort showed no interest in understanding what he could not control. When he killed Severus Snape, believing it would grant him full mastery of the Elder Wand, he overlooked a deeper truth. Snape's allegiance wasn't to Voldemort or even to Dumbledore, it was to Lily. Every risk he took, every double cross he enacted, was rooted in that lost love. After all this time, Dumbledore had asked him. "Always," Snape answered. Voldemort believed love made people weak. In truth, it made Snape dangerous in a way Voldemort never saw coming. Another blind spot created by his hatred of love was how he treated Draco Malfoy. Voldemort tasked Draco with killing Dumbledore not out of strategy, but cruelty, a punishment to Lucius for failing him. But in doing so, he unwittingly seeded compassion in Snape and guilt in Draco, which fractured the inner circle of Death Eaters. Voldemort never considered that a young boy might hesitate to kill or that the compassion of another man might foil his plan. For Voldemort, fear was the only motivator. That love might sway someone's hand? Unthinkable. Even his most powerful magical creations bore the same flaw. The horcruxes were a twisted perversion of soul and death, meant to grant eternal life. But the act of creating one required murder, a rejection of human connection so absolute that it tore the soul apart. Voldemort willingly split himself into pieces, not realizing that what made him unkillable also made him unstable. Each horcrux was a monument to his refusal to connect, to love, to feel. And each one was ultimately destroyed by people who acted out of love: Dumbledore, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and even Neville Longbottom. Neville, whose parents had been tortured into madness by Bellatrix, destroyed Nagini not out of revenge but to protect his friends. That kind of courage, born of love and pain, was something Voldemort never predicted. In the Battle of Hogwarts, the final stage was set. Voldemort walked among the dead and dying, certain of victory. But he couldn't see the real tide turning. He saw only spells and weapons, not what lay behind them. He didn't notice Molly Weasley throwing herself between her daughter and Bellatrix. He didn't feel the raw power of a mother's love in her final, lethal curse. He didn't understand that every student who stayed to fight did so not out of duty, but out of love, for their school, their teachers, their friends. Voldemort had legions, Hogwarts had unity. That difference cost him the war. Harry's final act was the ultimate embodiment of everything Voldemort could never comprehend. Walking into the Forbidden Forest, Harry made the same choice his mother did. He let himself die so that others might live. "I'm going to die," he thought, and accepted it. That acceptance, born from love, made the magic Lily gave him circle back once more. When Voldemort cast the killing curse again, it did not work. Harry didn't die, and Voldemort didn't ask why. He had no room in his mind to explore an answer that involved sacrifice, affection, or soul. Even when Harry returned from King's Cross and faced Voldemort one last time, Voldemort still could not grasp the lesson. He clung to the Elder Wand, convinced that power lay in the wand, in the spell, in the control. But the wand refused him. It refused him because Harry had disarmed Draco, who had disarmed Dumbledore. The wand answered loyalty, not strength. Voldemort's fatal mistake wasn't in choosing the wrong wand, it was in failing to understand that power, real power, is earned through connection, not stolen through murder. Voldemort's entire life was a monument to the idea that love is meaningless. He grew up unloved, rejected the concept of family, and chose isolation. He punished his Death Eaters for failure and rewarded them with fear. He killed anyone who showed mercy. He created an empire on the belief that love was a weakness. But in the end, it wasn't weakness that destroyed him. It was ignorance. He knew everything about curses, spells, and potions, but he knew nothing of what Dumbledore called the most powerful magic of all. And that is perhaps the greatest irony. For all his power, Voldemort was defeated by a magic he considered beneath him. He fell not to force, but to friendship. He was undone not by hate, but by hope. And he died at the hands of a boy who loved, who forgave, and who chose compassion over vengeance. "You're the weak one," Harry told him once, "and you'll never know love or friendship, and I feel sorry for you." Those words weren't a taunt, they were a truth Voldemort refused to see. Every step Voldemort took toward immortality led him further away from humanity. His body changed, his soul decayed, and his mind shrank into a shell that could no longer feel empathy or care. He didn't just kill people, he removed the meaning behind their lives. He saw no difference between a servant and a stone, between a child and a soldier. He could not fathom that love might be a weapon sharper than any blade. When Narcissa Malfoy lied to him in the forest, told him Harry was dead so she could find her son, Voldemort never suspected. He didn't understand that a mother's love could outweigh her fear of death. He believed her, because he thought fear always wins. That miscalculation cost him everything. The entire final battle turned on a mother's whisper, a heartbeat of compassion, and Voldemort, with all his cunning, never saw it coming. Even his name, Lord Voldemort, was a rejection of his birth. He erased Tom Riddle as if it were a weakness to be purged, but in doing so, he erased the boy who might have been saved. In another life, one where someone showed him kindness, he might have been different. But Voldemort chose to sever himself from others and became something less than human. He became a void, unable to give or receive love, and in that emptiness he withered. In the end, his death was not glorious. It was not even noble. He died a man alone, unloved and unwanted. His body crumpled to the ground like any other man's. There was no fanfare, no darkness swallowing the world, just silence, because the world didn't end when he died. It began to heal. And that, more than anything, proved he had failed. His entire legacy was dust, undone by the very thing he mocked. Voldemort never understood that love is not logical. It isn't bound by rules or strategy. It cannot be predicted, contained, or measured. And that is why it is stronger than fear. Because it endures, even in the darkest times, because it connects people who would otherwise stand alone. Because it gives meaning to death, courage to the weak, and victory to the hopeless. His tragedy wasn't just his defeat, it was his blindness. He had every tool of conquest at his disposal, but he lacked the one thing that would have given him peace. Not more horcruxes, not the Elder Wand, just the ability to care. That in the end was the magic he couldn't master, and that is why he lost. Number 20, always playing the obvious game. Voldemort stood in the graveyard, his robe fluttering like the wing of some monstrous bird, wand in hand, eyes like twin fires of hatred. He could have spoken softly, he could have reached into Harry's confusion, whispered twisted truths, turned that moment into doubt and poison, but instead he screamed, he flaunted, he duelled. That night, in the Goblet of Fire, the Dark Lord revealed not only his return, but also his utter lack of subtlety. The Death Eaters, summoned to watch his triumph, stood in a circle of rotted stone, and Voldemort performed like a mad actor starved for stage. A real strategist would have used the moment not for terror, but for transformation. Instead, he confirmed everything Dumbledore had feared. His enemy had returned, and he returned exactly the way everyone expected, with fire, with death, with thunder. For someone so obsessed with legacy, Voldemort never seemed to understand the art of long games. He demanded fear instead of faith, control instead of cunning. When Harry's scar began to burn, when their minds connected, Voldemort saw an opportunity, but again he squandered it. In Order of the Phoenix, he sent Harry visions. But they were crude, flat, dramatic. A hallway, a door, a trap. Even a second-year Hogwarts student would have been suspicious, and Harry, despite all his impulsiveness, began to resist. Voldemort tried to bait him with the image of Sirius Black suffering, tied and tortured. It worked, barely. But had Voldemort taken time to layer the lie, had he built a web of illusions slowly over weeks, not seconds, perhaps Harry would not have questioned it at all. A master manipulator, like Dumbledore, would have never used such a loud, cartoonish trick. The portrait of Phineas Nigellus reminded Harry that Sirius was at home. If Voldemort had planted a false memory showing Sirius leaving Grimmauld Place days earlier, if he'd let it slip through shared dreams with care, Harry might not have hesitated. But Voldemort's tactics screamed desperation. Even his choice of location, the Department of Mysteries, was grandiose. Why not lure Harry somewhere quieter, deadlier, and far from help? Why turn a secret mission into a theatrical showdown? Voldemort's failures are not born from lack of power. They are born from lack of vision. Every move he made assumed that fear would cloud logic. But Hogwarts students, children by all accounts, learned to adapt. In The Half-Blood Prince, Draco Malfoy, a boy still haunted by his own father's disgrace, managed to sneak Death Eaters into the castle. Not through terror, through cunning, through a vanishing cabinet and careful planning. Voldemort didn't teach Draco that. Draco learned it himself, desperate to avoid the very kind of bloody confrontation Voldemort so adored. When Voldemort possessed Harry in the Ministry, he could have quietly explored Harry's mind. Instead, he chose a full takeover, a public display. "You've lost, old man," he hissed through Harry's mouth, forgetting that Dumbledore never played for the crowd. Had Voldemort kept his presence hidden, perhaps Harry would have doubted his own thoughts. The seed of evil would have grown quietly. Instead, Voldemort burst out like a fever. Dumbledore watched, calm and tragic, and Harry repelled the possession with a simple truth. "You're the weak one, and you'll never know love." It wasn't power that drove Voldemort out. It was his lack of nuance. Consider the horcruxes, each object, a fragment of soul, hidden with traps and riddles, but the logic collapses under scrutiny. A diary, given to a child, a cup, guarded by a cursed liquid, a locket, left to a neurotic house elf and an old cave. These were not clever choices. They were dramatic ones. They suited Voldemort's love for flair, but they lacked long-term strategy. A clever villain would have destroyed the objects himself, rendered the evidence untraceable. Instead, Voldemort believed in legend. He treated his soul like a stage performance and paid the price for it. In the Deathly Hallows, when Voldemort assumed control of the Ministry, he again defaulted to fear. Muggle-born registration, propaganda, snatchers, public punishments. It worked, to an extent. But it also united the resistance. The very people he tried to break found strength in solidarity. Dumbledore's army reformed underground. The Order of the Phoenix adapted. Even Luna Lovegood, a girl he imprisoned for leverage, remained defiant. Voldemort could have used the Ministry to spread lies instead of laws. A true puppet regime would have whispered calm, reassured the masses while the real work happened in the dark. Instead, he ruled like a storm, and people learned to hide from the rain. He underestimated children over and over. He underestimated their loyalty, their imagination, their refusal to obey rules. In Chamber of Secrets, he returned through a diary, expecting to feed on fear. But he didn't understand that Ginny Weasley, fragile and shy, was protected by love stronger than any curse. When Harry found her, when he fought the basilisk and destroyed the diary, Voldemort learned nothing. "She's in love with you, isn't she?" the memory sneered. But even as he mocked, he missed the lesson. Love outmaneuvers fear. Voldemort believed he was a master of death. He believed he could cheat it, outsmart it, own it. And yet, when he heard of the Elder Wand, he responded like a child hearing of a toy. He didn't question the legend, he didn't search for history, he just believed. He killed Snape because he assumed Snape was the master. Never once did he ask the wand itself, never once did he consider that its loyalty might not follow murder like a coin tossed in blood. In the final battle, the wand turned against him. Not because of some ancient spell, because Voldemort never understood loyalty, not from wands, not from people. When Harry surrendered himself in the forest, Voldemort had a chance to make a choice. He could have spared Harry, he could have used him, twisted him, tried to reach into his grief and pull him into the dark. But Voldemort didn't want converts. He wanted corpses. He cast the killing curse, and in doing so, he destroyed the part of himself that lived in Harry. In trying to kill love, he only freed it. Even in Hogwarts, as he laid siege to the castle, Voldemort operated with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. He demanded Harry. He spoke through the defenders like a tyrant king. But what if he had waited? What if he had spread doubt instead, whispered that Dumbledore lied, that Harry wasn't what they thought? A single whisper, carefully placed, might have done more damage than 100 giants crashing through the gates. Snape, the only person who might have taught Voldemort about subtlety, died on the boathouse floor, bleeding, betrayed. Voldemort wanted the wand, so he killed the man who kept his cover for years, never questioning why Dumbledore trusted Snape, never understanding that betrayal does not always yield obedience. Snape's memories later poured into the Pensieve, revealing everything, not because Voldemort uncovered it, because Harry saw it. Voldemort, in his obsession with theatrics, left no room for understanding. The prophecy that shaped the war was never truly understood by Voldemort. Either must die at the hand of the other. Instead of studying it, instead of considering alternate meanings, Voldemort accepted the surface. He tried to kill the child, and created his equal. If he had let the prophecy die in obscurity, if he had ignored it, Harry Potter might have grown up normal. But Voldemort acted on impulse. He chose action over patience, and by doing so, he carved his own doom. In Philosopher's Stone, Quirrell served as Voldemort's puppet, but even then, subtlety was in short supply. The traps protecting the stone were clever, but the final defense? Love, and Voldemort didn't understand it. "He's mine!" he snarled, as Harry's touch burned Quirrell's flesh. He didn't learn. He returned in different forms, always chasing immortality, always ignoring the one force he could never control. Harry's survival wasn't luck. It was the result of Voldemort's blind spots. His belief that fear always wins, that children break under pressure, that power alone defines fate. He sent Dementors after a boy whose heart had seen worse. He tortured a girl whose mind outpaced his followers. He underestimated Neville Longbottom, the quiet one, who eventually destroyed Nagini. Voldemort saw people as roles. He missed their truth. Every scene that should have been his triumph was turned by his arrogance. His return at the graveyard ended in exposure. His control of the Ministry bred rebellion. His final duel ended not with death, but with the wand slipping from his grasp. "Let's finish this the way we started it," Harry said, and Voldemort, for all his fury, had nothing left but noise. The wand flew. The curse rebounded. Silence fell. He could have won. That's the cruel irony. He had the power. He had the time. But he never had the patience. He never had the insight. And every step he took, every obvious move, every loud curse, led him closer to the end he feared most. Not death, but irrelevance. Forgotten not because he lacked strength, but because he lacked subtlety. Number 21. Forgetting Hufflepuff and Ravenclaw. Lord Voldemort, in all his ruthless brilliance, often acted not as the supreme strategist he fancied himself, but rather as a creature imprisoned by his own narrow mind. Nowhere is this flaw more visible than in his treatment of the Hogwarts houses during his final campaign. His obsession with Gryffindor as the symbolic enemy and Slytherin as the natural ally blinded him to a powerful, unexplored possibility, the houses of Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff. His decision to ignore them entirely was not only tactically foolish, it was a fatal oversight. When Voldemort prepared to take Hogwarts, he saw only black and white, strength and weakness, loyalty or treason. But the wizarding world is not built in such extremes. It is a place of nuance, and Voldemort's inability to grasp this cost him dearly. From the beginning, Voldemort placed disproportionate emphasis on Slytherin House, believing that its values, ambition, cunning, self-preservation, mirrored his own. He saw them as his natural followers, fertile soil for his ideology. And he was right in part. Many Slytherins did join his ranks. Draco Malfoy, Pansy Parkinson, Theodore Nott, Blaise Zabini, names associated with privilege, ambition, and a predisposition toward the dark allure of power. But even Slytherin was not entirely loyal to him. When the final battle began, most Slytherin students fled. Voldemort's error was not in trusting Slytherin, it was in trusting only Slytherin. In parallel, he marked Gryffindor as his greatest threat. The house of bravery, courage, and self-sacrifice had produced his biggest enemies, James Potter, Sirius Black, Minerva McGonagall, and of course, Harry. It was Gryffindor blood that had thwarted him time and again. His hatred of Gryffindor blinded him to the strategic value of the other houses, and so he ignored Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff, dismissing them as irrelevant. But intelligence and loyalty are far from irrelevant. They are the lifeblood of sustained resistance. They are the backbone of strategy, endurance, and unity. Ravenclaw House, known for wit, learning, and creative thinking, had students like Luna Lovegood, Terry Boot, Padma Patil, and Cho Chang. These were not passive children. They were thinkers, observers, and when it mattered most, they were rebels. Voldemort made no effort to appeal to them, no overtures, no ideological seduction. He didn't even attempt coercion. To him, intelligence without ambition was worthless. But Luna, eccentric as she was, became a leader in Dumbledore's army, returned to fight at Hogwarts, and stood shoulder to shoulder with Harry. Her words, "We should close his eyes, don't you think?" There. Now he could be sleeping. As she closed Dobby's eyes, revealed the emotional depth that Voldemort could neither understand nor exploit. And what of Hufflepuff, the house of loyalty, hard work, and quiet strength? Cedric Diggory had embodied its ideals before his untimely death at Voldemort's hand, a death that should have taught Voldemort something crucial. Hufflepuffs are not cowards. They do not seek glory, but they do not shrink from duty. Zachariah Smith, Ernie Macmillan, Susan Bones, these students stood with Harry when it mattered. And most importantly, so did Neville Longbottom, a boy whom Voldemort had dismissed as nothing. A pure-blood weakling, he had once thought, an irrelevant side character in the story of the boy who lived, but it was Neville who severed the head of Nagini, the final horcrux. Voldemort had created an immortal anchor in that serpent, and a Hufflepuff dealt the blow that broke his immortality. The irony is cutting. In his pursuit of power, Voldemort surrounded himself with sycophants and brutes. He could have had visionaries, analysts, and loyalists had he cast a wider net. He could have enticed Ravenclaws with the promise of forbidden knowledge. He could have offered Hufflepuffs the promise of stability in a reformed world order. He could have used their strengths to fortify his regime. But Voldemort didn't think that way. His ideology was elitist. His world was divided between those born for power and those who should be ruled. He didn't believe a Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw could make a meaningful choice. That was his blindness. Even from a purely manipulative perspective, ignoring Ravenclaws was astonishing. Ravenclaws like Roger Davies and Michael Corner had access to magical knowledge Voldemort could have weaponized. He could have promised them research positions, leadership in a new magical order, or access to the Department of Mysteries. He could have played on their intellectual vanity. But to do so, he would have needed to understand them. And Voldemort never truly understood people. He understood fear, ambition, pain, but not complexity, not nuance. In this, he was no dark lord of strategy, but a tyrant of patterns. The same goes for Hufflepuff. Imagine if Voldemort had used the memory of Cedric Diggory to galvanize support. Imagine if he had painted Harry as the boy who led Cedric to his death and then failed to protect him. There was space to sow doubt, to fracture trust, to whisper lies, but Voldemort never used propaganda effectively. His power was built on fear, not persuasion. It's telling that the most effective propaganda came not from Voldemort himself, but from Dolores Umbridge and the Ministry, whose pamphlets and decrees actually swayed minds. Voldemort preferred brutality to subtlety, and so Hufflepuff remained untouched, untempted, and ultimately united in defiance. In The Deathly Hallows, J.K. Rowling writes, "The sword of Gryffindor had come to him out of the Sorting Hat." That moment, Neville's moment, should never have been possible in Voldemort's mind. A Hufflepuff wielding the symbol of Gryffindor's might. It was unthinkable to him, and yet reality made a mockery of his prejudices. Neville proved that courage is not monopolized by Gryffindor, just as loyalty is not confined to Hufflepuff or intellect to Ravenclaw. The houses are different in tone, not in value. Voldemort's fatal mistake was in believing otherwise. Even within Slytherin, Voldemort failed to truly inspire loyalty. Many joined him because they feared him, but fear breeds desertion. In the Battle of Hogwarts, when Pansy Parkinson called for the surrender of Harry Potter, McGonagall's response, ordering the Slytherins out, reflected the general distrust they had earned. But imagine if the other houses had been similarly corrupted. Imagine if a portion of Ravenclaws, out of disdain for chaos, chose order through Voldemort. Imagine if Hufflepuffs, out of fear, were promised sanctuary. Voldemort left these doors closed. There was no calculated infiltration of Ravenclaw Tower, no effort to find allies among the analytically inclined. He ignored them even when they held secrets he desired. He needed Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem, a horcrux hidden in plain sight. Did he ever consider turning to a Ravenclaw student for insight? Did he ask anyone how Ravenclaw herself thought? Of course not. Instead, he relied on the ghost of her daughter, the Grey Lady, only when desperation left him no other path. Voldemort valued the diadem, not the mind behind it, and so he never grasped its deeper significance. This rigid worldview made him blind to opportunity. Voldemort was a man who believed himself above persuasion. He never truly recruited, he conscripted. Those who followed him did so because they were terrified, indebted, or indoctrinated. He had no political vision, no true charisma. Contrast this with Dumbledore, who inspired loyalty even from those who disagreed with him. The loyalty Harry inspired was a reflection of that legacy. It is no accident that the Resistance, the DA, the Order, the teachers, all drew from every house. The Death Eaters were a narrow echo chamber, and that made them weak. Without the strategic minds of Ravenclaw or the moral stamina of Hufflepuff, they lacked diversity of thought. The war, in the end, was not just a battle of power, but a battle of minds and values. Voldemort could not imagine a world where power was shared. He couldn't fathom that strength might come from compassion, or that brilliance might spring from humility. That is why, when the castle fell into open rebellion, he misread its defenders entirely. He believed Hogwarts would fracture. Instead, it coalesced. Professors Flitwick, a Ravenclaw, Sprout, a Hufflepuff, and McGonagall, a Gryffindor, fought side by side. Students of all houses manned the battlements. In the room of requirement, Ravenclaws, Hufflepuffs, and even a few Slytherins prepared defences. They weren't fighting because they loved Harry. They were fighting because Voldemort gave them no other choice. He didn't offer an alternative future. He offered fear and tyranny. And so they resisted. Even his own Death Eaters were limited by his worldview. Bellatrix Lestrange, powerful and devoted, never offered political insight. Lucius Malfoy, with his influence and wealth, was used as a pawn. Voldemort's reliance on brute force, on magical terror, ultimately failed to account for something deeper, the soul of the school. And in that soul, every house had a voice. The final blow came not from a Gryffindor, not from Harry, but from a boy who had once been invisible. Neville Longbottom was the child Voldemort had dismissed from prophecy. In the end, that dismissal became poetic justice. Voldemort saw only what he expected: heroes born in scarlet and gold, villains rising in green and silver, but fate rewards those who look deeper. Neville, nurtured by quiet friendship and unwavering loyalty, grew into a warrior. His swing of the sword wasn't just the destruction of a horcrux, it was the collapse of Voldemort's illusions. This was a war of symbols as much as spells. Voldemort believed that power could be hoarded, that alliances were made through dominance, not trust. But Hogwarts was built on the opposite idea. The Sorting Hat had once tried to warn them. And now the Sorting Hat is here and you all know the score. I sort you into houses because that is what I'm for. But this year I'll go further. Listen closely to my song. Though condemned I am to split you, still I worry that it's wrong. Voldemort never listened. The lesson he never learned was that unity is strength, and the strength he dismissed The quiet resolve of Hufflepuff, the piercing insight of Ravenclaw became his undoing, not because they were the loudest or the flashiest, but because they endured. They stood when others fell. They thought when others panicked. They fought, not for glory, but for what was right. And so the end came, not with a scream, but with a severing. The snake fell, the soul shattered, and Voldemort, master of death, was undone by those he had once deemed irrelevant. That is the true irony of his reign. He feared the wrong enemies, trusted the wrong friends, and ignored the houses that might have saved him from himself. Number 22. Trusting the worst candidates. Voldemort's downfall was not simply the result of a heroic boy's defiance or an ancient prophecy fulfilled. It was also, and perhaps more damningly, the result of his own catastrophic misjudgment. For all his brilliance, cunning, and strategic ruthlessness, Voldemort failed at the most basic aspect of leadership, choosing the right people. Again and again, he placed unimaginable trust in individuals who were not only unsuited for the roles he gave them, but actively undermined the stability of his regime. In a world where loyalty meant survival, he gave power to the fanatical, the cowardly, and the self-serving, convinced that fear alone was enough to guarantee obedience. But fear breeds instability, and the seeds of his empire were sown not just with dark magic, but with dysfunction. Bellatrix Lestrange stood as the most glaring symbol of this self-inflicted rot. Voldemort treated her like a favored general, someone he clearly respected even in his own twisted way. She was given privileged access, entrusted with crucial operations, and permitted liberties no other Death Eater could even dream of. But Bellatrix was not a general. She was a zealot, and a dangerously unstable one. Her devotion to Voldemort was cult-like, bordering on worship. She wasn't interested in strategy or long-term plans. She wanted chaos, destruction, and most of all, his approval. During the Battle of the Department of Mysteries, her recklessness was on full display. She killed Sirius Black, not because it was tactically necessary, but because it pleased her. Voldemort's comment to her, "You should be honored, Sissy. He shows me almost as much respect as he does you," demonstrates how much he valued her blind allegiance over reason. But in giving her that much trust, he lost control over someone who could, and did, act irrationally in high-stakes moments. If Bellatrix was the poster child for fanatical loyalty, then Peter Pettigrew was the embodiment of weakness and cowardice. To entrust this man with the most delicate mission of all, resurrecting his master, defied all logic. Pettigrew had already proven himself to be a betrayer, switching sides to save himself during the First Wizarding War. He was weak-willed, pathetic, and servile, unable to withstand any real pressure without collapsing. When he helped Voldemort return to his body in the Goblet of Fire, it was not from loyalty, but from fear. Yet Voldemort rewarded him with a silver hand and kept him in close proximity. "You returned to me, not out of loyalty, but out of fear of your old friends," Voldemort told him, and still he let him remain. In the end, Pettigrew's moment of betrayal in the Malfoy Manor, when he hesitated to kill Harry and was killed by his own enchanted hand, was a direct result of this misjudgment. Voldemort didn't believe in change or redemption, but he also failed to accept the full cost of trusting the spineless. Lucius Malfoy presents yet another example, albeit in a different mold. Lucius was clever, wealthy, and influential. But he was never truly loyal to Voldemort. He was loyal to his own self-image and the status quo. During the First Wizarding War, he aligned with Voldemort because it was politically convenient. When Voldemort fell, Lucius claimed he had been under the Imperius Curse, an obvious lie that was nevertheless accepted due to his status. But Voldemort, upon his return, chose to forgive him, not out of genuine trust, but because he needed him. Lucius was given the diary of Tom Riddle, a powerful and dangerous artifact, to plant in Hogwarts. He failed. Later, he led the attack on the Department of Mysteries and failed again, allowing the prophecy to be destroyed. His failures were not born of incompetence, but of fear and a lack of conviction. Voldemort mistook calculation for loyalty, and as Lucius crumbled under pressure, the cracks in Voldemort's inner circle deepened. Voldemort's recruitment strategy often followed a disturbingly consistent pattern. Those who were most emotionally unstable or morally broken were promoted rapidly. Fenrir Greyback, a sadistic werewolf with a lust for maiming children, was not just tolerated but welcomed into the Death Eater fold. His talent for terror was considered an asset. Yet aligning with someone so feral and uncontrollable carried enormous risk. Greyback was not someone who could be reasoned with or controlled. He was driven by base instincts and personal hatred, allowing him near children like Bill. Weasley only fueled the resistance against Voldemort. This wasn't strategic. It was short-sighted bloodlust masquerading as power. Then there was Barty Crouch Jr., another glaring example of fanatical extremism. Intelligent and capable? Certainly. But his obsession with Voldemort was as pathological as Bellatrix's. The plan to infiltrate Hogwarts and manipulate the Triwizard Tournament could have been executed with precision and secrecy by someone more stable. Instead, Crouch's mania nearly gave him away. He tortured the real Mad-Eye Moody and couldn't suppress his own tics and compulsions, eventually drawing suspicion. His unmasking by Dumbledore proved that Voldemort's reliance on unstable devotees was not a fluke, it was a pattern. Even the Carrows, Alecto and Amicus, chosen to terrorize Hogwarts during Voldemort's brief reign, were more interested in cruelty than control. Their sadistic treatment of students turned the school from an institution of fear into a hotbed of rebellion. The formation of Dumbledore's army during this time was not despite the Carrows' presence, but because of it. Voldemort failed to understand that oppression without structure invites revolt. Instead of installing competent enforcers, he sent thugs, and thugs provoke resistance. The most astonishing failure of judgment came in the form of Severus Snape. Although Snape was ultimately Dumbledore's agent and a master of deception, Voldemort's trust in him was not born of strategic calculation, it was born of arrogance. Voldemort believed himself so superior that the idea of someone outsmarting him was laughable. He assumed Snape's cold demeanor and apparent detachment meant loyalty, but Snape's motivations were deeply personal and wholly opposed to Voldemort's. The boy Voldemort tried to kill, Harry, was someone Snape had vowed to protect, in memory of Lily Potter. Voldemort, in giving Snape access to his inner circle, essentially handed a dagger to his enemy. Snape fed him false information, misdirected him, and ultimately facilitated his destruction. Relying on loyalty forged through fear, Voldemort dismissed the value of competence. He believed that terror could substitute for trust and fanaticism for rational planning. In truth, his followers lacked cohesion. They betrayed one another, lied to him, and often failed spectacularly. When Lucius failed to retrieve the prophecy, Voldemort responded by stripping his family of status. But instead of replacing him with someone more capable, he installed Bellatrix as a de facto lieutenant. The result? More chaos, more loss, more disillusionment among his ranks. Even the decision to mark his followers with the Dark Mark, a signal of supposed loyalty, became a curse. The Dark Mark, it is how we summon one another, he explained. But it also tethered him to the incompetent. The mark didn't discriminate between a loyal warrior and a selfish coward, and when he summoned them, they came, but not with loyalty, only with dread. In times of real crisis, few stood by him. When the Battle of Hogwarts erupted, many of his followers fled. The cowardice he had ignored had come home to roost. In any organization, leadership is tested not only by crisis but by continuity. Voldemort had no real leadership model. He ruled by terror, rewarded by favoritism, and punished based on whim. There was no clear hierarchy, no merit-based advancement, and certainly no accountability. When one Death Eater failed, he was tortured or cast aside, but not replaced by someone better. It was a rotating carousel of dysfunction. And yet the wizarding world feared him, not because his regime was efficient, but because his cruelty was legendary. But cruelty alone cannot sustain power. His terror did not inspire loyalty. It inspired secrecy, sabotage, and ultimately defection. Narcissa Malfoy lied to him. Snape betrayed him. Pettigrew hesitated. Lucius disobeyed. These betrayals weren't anomalies. They were the inevitable result of a structure built on fear. The moment Voldemort decided that Nagini, a snake, was worthy of being his final horcrux was another testament to his blind trust in the wrong allies. By tethering a piece of his soul to a creature so exposed, he invited doom. He didn't anticipate that someone like Neville Longbottom, ignored, underestimated, could deliver a fatal blow. But Voldemort's choices made this not only possible, but inevitable. What's more, his inability to see the long-term picture destroyed the very infrastructure he was trying to build. Hogwarts, the Ministry, even the Death Eaters themselves were fractured institutions under his control. He never cultivated leaders, only tools, and tools wear out, or worse, break. In the end, the child he marked as his enemy was the one who survived, not just because of love or destiny, but because Voldemort again and again made the wrong choices. He chose the scream over the whisper, the fanatic over the planner, the servant over the strategist. His army was not an empire, it was a house of cards, and it collapsed under the weight of its own instability. He trusted Bellatrix, and she created enemies. He trusted Pettigrew, and he died because of it. He trusted Lucius, and the prophecy was lost. He trusted Snape, and he walked into his death. Voldemort's fatal flaw was not his lack of power, it was his belief that power alone was enough. In a world where every move could mean life or death, Voldemort's blind trust in the worst of men and women sealed his fate. He was defeated not just by heroes, but by his own hand. Number 23. Neglecting ancient magic. Of all the choices Lord Voldemort made in his rise to power, few were as baffling as his consistent disregard for ancient magical knowledge. It is an irony soaked in darkness, a man obsessed with bloodlines, with the legacy of Salazar Slytherin, with the purity of magic, yet utterly blind to the vast, mysterious forces woven into the very bones of the magical world. For someone who proclaimed to fear nothing but death, Voldemort remained strangely uninterested in the deeper truths that might have offered him protection far greater than any Horcrux ever could. He delved into forbidden arts, yes, but only those that fed his ego. His understanding of magic was vast, yet pitifully shallow in some of its most crucial depths. Voldemort did not just overlook ancient knowledge, he actively rejected it when it did not suit his purposes. He scoffed at love, even though Dumbledore repeatedly warned him that it was a powerful, binding magic, older and more potent than anything he could comprehend. When Harry survived the killing curse as a baby, protected by the blood magic of his mother's sacrifice, Voldemort did not stop to ask what kind of power had defeated him. He dismissed it as sentimentality, a quirk of fate. He never returned to that question, never explored the ancient magics tied to family, lineage, or selfless action. For someone so fixated on immortality, his curiosity was remarkably selective. The most damning evidence of his ignorance lies in his treatment of the Hogwarts founder's legacy. Voldemort was obsessed with Slytherin, and yet he used Slytherin's relic, a locket, not to study its magical properties, but to defile it with dark magic. He desecrated it by turning it into a Horcrux. He did not attempt to unlock whatever enchantments Salazar might have embedded within. He never pursued Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem for its rumoured ability to enhance wisdom, beyond using it as a mere vessel for part of his soul. The founders created objects with deeply embedded magic, but Voldemort cared only for their symbolic value, not their power. Even the magical discipline of ancient runes, known to contain secrets lost to modern wizardry, was beneath his attention. Hermione Granger, a 17-year-old student, had the insight and discipline to explore runes, and she believed them to hold immense value. Yet Voldemort, who lived decades longer and possessed unimaginable resources, never explored this field. If he had, he might have discovered wards and spells crafted long before the Statute of Secrecy, protections that transcended conventional magic. Instead, he wasted his intellect on brute force curses and crude fear tactics. Voldemort could have studied the Department of Mysteries, which held time-turners and whispered secrets of death itself. He could have infiltrated the unspeakables, discovered what they knew of time, space, love, thought, or death, the deepest laws of the universe. But he was too arrogant to see value in knowledge he did not already possess. Even his encounter with the prophecy, which he believed to be a threat, was handled with more violence than thought. He heard a fragment and reacted with murder. He never questioned what the rest might reveal. His fear drove his actions, not wisdom. When Voldemort returned to a body in the goblet of fire, he proclaimed, "There is nothing worse than death, Dumbledore." But Dumbledore responded with chilling certainty, "You are quite wrong." That one line reveals everything Voldemort failed to learn. Death is a mystery, yes, but also a teacher. The ancient wizards did not all seek to avoid it. Many of them, like the Peverell brothers in the Tale of the Three Brothers, approached death with different strategies. One sought to hide, one sought power, and one greeted death as an equal. Voldemort chose the path of hiding, like the second brother, but with none of the wisdom. He never pursued the resurrection stone, not for the sake of understanding, but because he did not value emotional ties. It was hidden in the Peverell ring, one of his horcruxes, and he never even noticed its true identity. A deathly hallow resting in his possession, and he used it only to store a piece of his fragmented soul. This failure speaks volumes. The hallows are among the oldest known magical artifacts. To most wizards, they are legend. To Voldemort, they were irrelevant. His mind could not grasp the power of what he did not invent. What's even more telling is his lack of attention to spirits or ancient magical entities. There are mentions in magical history of wizards communing with ancient spirits, beings older than time, bound to place or lineage. Even Hogwarts itself is said to possess echoes of its founders, echoes that might speak to those who listen. But Voldemort was too consumed with domination to seek communion. He didn't listen, he conquered. If there were whispers in the dungeons, in the forbidden forest, in the oldest tomes buried in the restricted sections of ancient libraries, Voldemort ignored them all. His misuse of the Chamber of Secrets is perhaps the most literal expression of this flaw. Salazar Slytherin created the chamber as a secret legacy, but it was not merely a weapon vault, it was a place of history, of ideology, perhaps even prophecy. The basilisk, a creature bred and hidden for centuries, was a tool, but what else lay within? Voldemort used the beast to kill and instill fear, but he never questioned what Slytherin's deeper purpose was. What knowledge was sealed with the serpent? What rituals or writings might have been hidden there? He never asked. Contrast that with Hermione Granger, who once used the school library and later even the restricted section to uncover secrets that most adult wizards had long forgotten. In the Chamber of Secrets, she discovered what the basilisk was using: only muggle books and persistence. In The Half-Blood Prince, she explored Eileen Prince's annotations to decode advanced potion-making. She valued ancient texts, obscure knowledge, even when it seemed irrelevant. Voldemort, by comparison, rarely read unless the book was banned, the spell was cursed, or the knowledge would directly enhance his control. The irony is suffocating. Voldemort feared Dumbledore above all others, and Dumbledore's strength came not from physical power, but from wisdom. The headmaster of Hogwarts spent decades studying the limits of magic, the nature of souls, and the delicate balance between intention and consequence. He understood the magic of blood and choice. He could see truths Voldemort never even noticed. In The Half-Blood Prince, Dumbledore said, "You are too young to understand how unusual you are, Harry." He meant that Harry understood sacrifice, understood love. Voldemort's soul, shriveled and cracked by his own hands, could not even comprehend such things. Voldemort's enchantments were built on intimidation, not sustainability. Gringotts' vault protections failed. The curse on the locket drove people mad but didn't kill. The protective spells on Nagini were easily breached by Neville's sword. Even his army was not bound by loyalty but by fear. Compare that to the ancient enchantments that guarded the Philosopher's Stone. Those were tests of intelligence, skill, courage, and teamwork. Voldemort could not pass them on his own. He had to use Quirrell, and even then he failed. The Hall of Prophecy, one of the Ministry's oldest chambers, contained thousands of oracles, voices from time itself. Voldemort sought only one. He never considered what the others might hold. Even Bellatrix Lestrange, for all her madness, understood reverence. She bowed to him like a god, but she also feared the prophecy. Voldemort only feared that it might be true. He never tried to understand the mechanisms of prophecy, never questioned how the threads of fate were woven. For someone who tried to defy death, he spent very little effort understanding destiny. In the Deathly Hallows we see Voldemort's power reaching its peak, and yet his choices grow more absurd. He flies without a broom, but still cannot detect the Elder Wand's loyalty. He kills Snape for the wand, believing murder alone transfers allegiance. He fails to understand wand lore, one of the oldest magical traditions. Ollivander tried to explain it. Dumbledore understood it. Even Harry began to sense it. Voldemort treated wands like weapons, not like living instruments. He missed the truth by miles. His death was not simply a result of Harry's courage, it was the product of Voldemort's intellectual laziness. He underestimated Lily's blood protection, failed to grasp the magic of Harry's sacrifice, and misunderstood the Elder Wand's true allegiance. Each mistake was rooted in ignorance, and that ignorance was a choice. He refused to study what mattered most, not the flashiest magic, not the darkest curses, but the deep, quiet forces that governed life and death. Voldemort created 7 horcruxes, fracturing his soul beyond repair. But even this act, as horrifying as it was, lacked innovation. He replicated the same ritual multiple times. He never improved it, never layered it with additional protections drawn from arcane traditions. In The Half-Blood Prince, Slughorn said, "Few would want to follow the path Voldemort has taken." But the truth is, few would consider it a path at all. It was a dead end, paved with short-sighted cruelty. The magical world is vast and ancient. Beneath the earth lie libraries older than Hogwarts. On the edge of consciousness flicker spirits and spells that defy language. There are spells sung, whispered, woven into tapestries and bones. Voldemort sought only what screamed power in the present. He never looked backward, never asked what the ancients knew. His downfall wasn't just moral or ethical, it was intellectual. He failed because he didn't study, and that is the greatest irony of all. Lord Voldemort, the most feared dark wizard of the age, was not defeated by strength or numbers. He was defeated by knowledge he refused to seek. Number 24, loud and proud takeover of the Ministry. When Lord Voldemort seized the Ministry of Magic, he believed he had delivered a master stroke. The heart of magical Britain was now his, and he imagined the wizarding world would tremble beneath his grip. But the brutal irony of it all is that this boldest of moves was not a demonstration of superior strategy. It was a demonstration of impatience, of arrogance, of a deeply flawed understanding of human nature. Rather than subtly infecting the system with loyalists, he shattered it with brute force. It was not a conquest, it was a blunder. The takeover began not with stealth, but with violence. Rufus Scrimgeour was murdered, his body discarded like yesterday's parchment. The Ministry has fallen, Scrimgeour is dead, they are coming. These were the desperate words of Kingsley Shacklebolt, whispered through the enchanted Patronus during Bill and Fleur's wedding. It was a moment of pure fear. But behind that fear was the foundation of resistance. Voldemort had aimed to intimidate the wizarding population into submission. Instead, he alerted them to the war. Rather than installing puppet leaders under a veil of normalcy, Voldemort placed Pius Thicknesser, an imperious mouthpiece, at the very top. It was a clear and public coup. The Death Eaters did not hide in shadows. They strutted the halls of the Ministry in dark cloaks. The Department of Magical Law Enforcement became a hunting ground. Muggle-borns were rounded up under the pretense of stealing magic, a grotesque new mandate of the Muggle-born Registration Commission. What had once been a tedious, slow-moving bureaucracy became a machine of terror overnight. Dolores Umbridge, a figure already synonymous with cruelty, was elevated to a key position, her desk now adorned with the horrific locket of Salazar Slytherin, one of Voldemort's own horcruxes. It was poetic in its darkness, but strategically disastrous. The moment her name became attached to the locket, the Ministry itself became a beacon of dark magic, a structure practically humming with the taint of Voldemort's soul. Rather than camouflaging his influence, he broadcast it. Voldemort's obsession with fear blinded him to a basic truth. Fear can paralyze, but it can also ignite rebellion. Resistance took root quickly. The Order of the Phoenix, which had long struggled to gain momentum under the veil of official denial, now had a clear enemy. The public could see it, hear it, feel it in the whispers on Diagon Alley, the sudden disappearances, the screams in the night. Dissent began to spread. Underground publications flourished. Potterwatch, a rogue radio show, became the voice of sanity in a world gone mad. Voldemort had sought to control the narrative, but his brutality ensured he never could. His greatest mistake lay in misunderstanding the purpose of the Ministry itself. The Ministry was not a fortress to be taken by storm. It was a system, a web of legal authority, bureaucratic inertia, and institutional trust. By smashing through the front doors, Voldemort didn't just seize the Ministry, he destroyed its credibility. Law became weaponized, trials were grotesque performances, trust in authority evaporated. The wizarding public didn't feel ruled, they felt invaded. The enforcement arm of the Ministry, now rebranded and crawling with snatchers and Death Eaters, became a tool of fear rather than protection. Young wizards like Dirk Cresswell were dragged in chains, families disappeared, children whispered about it at Hogwarts, even the innocent began to flee. And here lies another flaw in Voldemort's approach. He believed that power came from visible control, but in reality, power lies in perceived legitimacy. His government had none. Consider what might have been. If Voldemort had quietly placed Thickness under the Imperious curse, but left Scrimgeour alive as a powerless figurehead, he could have manipulated policy behind the scenes. He could have appointed Death Eater sympathizers to senior positions, ensured his enemies were sidelined under pretexts, and created laws that quietly eroded rights without stirring panic. It would have been slower, but it would have lasted. Instead, he unleashed Yaxley and Travers and the Carrows, agents of chaos who lacked subtlety and strategy. These were men who thrived on violence, not politics. Every arrest, every public act of cruelty became another crack in the fragile illusion of order. Voldemort never grasped that for institutions to function under tyranny, people must pretend they are not tyrannized. Once the masquerade is broken, the system cannot be controlled. It shatters. The Hogwarts Express still ran, but its passengers felt the chill of surveillance. At school, the Carrows taught students how to torture one another in detentions. Neville Longbottom, once a shy boy, now bore bruises and scars as badges of resistance. The message from the top had filtered down with such clarity that even children were transformed into revolutionaries. Had Voldemort masked his control, these seeds of rebellion might never have grown. Even his enemies marveled at his misstep. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry infiltrates the Ministry under Polyjuice Potion, he's struck by how obvious the transformation is. The Ministry of Magic has fallen. They are controlling everything, Hermione had said. And inside the building, the truth was even worse. The statue in the atrium now depicted a witch and wizard crushing muggles beneath them, a grotesque symbol of Voldemort's ideology. Such art does not hide tyranny, it announces it. The files in Umbridge's office listed Muggleborns to be interrogated. The air in the building reeked of panic and power. Even those who towed the line were terrified. And fear, when constant, ceases to be a tool of obedience. It becomes a call to revolt. In trying to stamp out resistance, Voldemort only spread it. Harry, Ron, and Hermione did not even need to work hard to uncover the Ministry's corruption. Everything was in plain sight. The lies were blatant, the tyranny unmasked. What should have been the hardest fortress to breach was undone by the arrogance of its new master. His enemies didn't need spies, they needed eyes. Voldemort had made the invisible visible, the hidden overt. Worse still, Voldemort's conquest inspired enemies within. Not just Harry and the Order, but goblins, centaurs, werewolves, and even reluctant Ministry employees began to sabotage from within. He had not united the magical world, he had fractured it. A clever ruler would have formed uneasy alliances, used favors and blackmail. Voldemort used fear and curses. The difference was fatal. It is no surprise, then, that when the Battle of Hogwarts began, few rallied to the Ministry's banner. Its authority had eroded. Its badge had become a mark of shame. Those who fought in the final battle did not fight for a government. They fought for a future without Voldemort. His symbolic victory at the Ministry had become a strategic albatross. Even Death Eaters began to question the wisdom of the plan. Lucius Malfoy, once so proud, begged for his son's safety. Bellatrix, ever fanatical, was isolated in her own madness. The inner circle rotted under the weight of their master's demands. Voldemort had taken the Ministry, but he had lost the war of perception. In seizing everything, he had earned nothing. The final irony lies in Voldemort's own behavior. He, who preached pureblood supremacy, needed a functioning magical society to rule over. But by destroying the Ministry, he destroyed the very foundation of that society. There was no economy, no legal system, no education, only terror and chaos. What remained for him to rule? The memory of his rise became the blueprint of his fall. Wizarding families, who once remained neutral, began hiding fugitives. Gringotts saw increasing disruption. Forbidden books changed hands. The very system Voldemort had hoped to control became a network of resistance. He had not planted roots, he had salted the earth. And so, when Voldemort stood at Hogwarts wand in hand, demanding surrender, he did so not as a ruler, but as a tyrant who had already lost. No banners flew for him, no songs were sung in his name. The only thing that followed his name was fear, and fear, as history shows, is a poor substitute for loyalty. Voldemort's invasion of the Ministry was not a triumph. It was a catastrophe of ego, a case study in how power without wisdom consumes itself. He chose control over persuasion, terror over strategy, speed over patience. And in doing so, he ensured that even in the halls of power, he would find no peace, only defiance. For the Ministry of Magic is more than stone and spells. It is belief, it is structure, it is the quiet confidence that someone, somewhere, is holding the balance. Voldemort took that belief and crushed it under his heel, but as always, crushed things have a way of rising back, sharper, louder, stronger. His was a victory written in smoke, and it vanished just as quickly. Number 25. Ruling by fear alone. Of all the enigmatic choices Voldemort made throughout his Dark campaign, none appears more self-defeating than his absolute reliance on fear as the sole instrument of control. It was not just a strategy, it was the foundation of his entire ideology. Yet fear, for all its raw intensity, is a brittle force. When used as the only tool to manipulate, it does not inspire loyalty. It inspires silence, trembling hands, and anxious glances, and eventually it provokes either cowardice or rebellion. Voldemort, so absorbed in his own myth of power, failed to grasp that even the most terrified heart will seek refuge or revenge when given the smallest opportunity. He had no vision beyond domination, no promise of a better world, no dream to offer the masses who might have been swayed by whispers of strength, legacy, and order. His movement, if it can even be called that, lacked ideological substance. There was no greater purpose, no utopia he claimed to build, only destruction, only the extinction of what he deemed impure. The purity of blood, that tired refrain, was hardly enough to rally those who were not already broken or twisted. Instead of leading with ambition or unity, Voldemort ruled with death and shadows. The clearest example of this flawed philosophy unfolded during his seizure of the Ministry of Magic. Having managed to control the core of magical governance, he could have transformed it into a symbol of power, of order, of an unshakable new regime. Instead, he let it rot into a haunted parody of authority. The atrium became a place of whispers and disappearances. Workers arrived in dread and left in silence. A statue, labelled "Magic is Might," loomed with cruel eyes, depicting muggles crushed beneath the weight of wizarding supremacy. There was no dignity, no outreach, no promise of better days, only threats, surveillance, and violence. Even among those who detested Muggleborns, there was little enthusiasm, only caution. When Dolores Umbridge, always hungry for control, was appointed to enforce this regime, it was telling that she did not celebrate a new age of wizarding strength. She merely exploited her role to terrorize others, operating under the same logic. As Voldemort, people will comply if you make them afraid enough. But in truth, Umbridge had no followers, only victims, and Voldemort had no nation, only prisoners, both literal and psychological. The contrast with other dictators in fiction and history is striking. Take Darth Vader, another icon of evil. The empire he helped enforce was built not only on fear, but also on a vision of peace through power. Citizens of that galaxy could convince themselves, however falsely, that order and security came at the cost of freedom. Voldemort, by contrast, offered no such illusion. He never tried to win minds, only to break them. Even his Death Eaters, those closest to him, served not from belief but from terror or ambition. Bellatrix Lestrange worshipped him like a dark god, but hers was a madness beyond loyalty. Lucius Malfoy served to preserve status and wealth. When he failed, Voldemort discarded him without hesitation. His cruelty toward Lucius, Narcissa, and even Draco was not just punishment, it was a warning to others. But such methods cannot build a lasting empire. A servant who obeys only out of fear is the first to run when fear no longer holds. Dumbledore understood this truth and built his influence accordingly. As he once said, you fail to recognize that it matters not what someone is born, but what they grow to be. He gave people hope. He inspired students, teachers, and even magical creatures. He saw beyond the bloodlines, and that made him a symbol of resistance. Voldemort could have tried to co-opt that vision, twist it into a message of strength, of magical destiny, of a world ruled by the powerful. But he never did. He was too obsessed with cleansing, too blind to strategy that relied on persuasion. Perhaps his greatest missed opportunity came after the fall of the Ministry. With Harry declared undesirable number one, Voldemort could have crafted a narrative, recast himself as a misunderstood reformer, and Harry as a reckless rebel threatening stability. Even the Daily Prophet, under his control, might have become a weapon of misinformation and subtle propaganda. But Voldemort had no patience for such manipulation. Instead, the Prophet simply parroted fear, disseminating crude lies that convinced no one. Readers learned to read between the lines, and the underground press, like the Quibbler, gained power in response. It was not just the public Voldemort alienated. Magical creatures like the goblins, the centaurs, and the house elves were treated with either contempt or disregard. Griphook, who eventually helped Harry break into Gringotts, did so out of self-interest and resentment. Voldemort could have made alliances, could have promised a better place in the magical hierarchy to those willing to serve. But again, his instinct was dominance. The goblins saw him for what he was, a tyrant who would take without giving. And in the end, They too resisted. At Hogwarts, where he might have cultivated the future of his empire, he installed fear instead of loyalty. Under Snape's reluctant headship, and with the Carrows inflicting punishments and cruelty, the school became a crucible of trauma. But even children, especially children, do not respond well to being ruled by torture. Instead of breeding obedience, Voldemort bred defiance. The resurrection of Dumbledore's army, even in those bleak times, was not just rebellion, it was proof that Voldemort's methods created the very enemies he feared. Neville Longbottom, a boy once mocked for his lack of confidence, became a symbol of resistance. He stood up not because he wasn't afraid, but because fear, when constantly pushed, eventually breaks. "They didn't stop me," Neville said. "It doesn't matter that Harry's gone." Voldemort never foresaw that. He expected despair, but instead he awakened courage. Even his ultimate strategy, splitting his soul into horcruxes, was not a masterstroke of cleverness, but of desperation. He believed that death was the ultimate enemy, and so he made himself as hard to kill as possible. But in doing so, he tied his survival to objects that could be found, targeted, and destroyed. It was the act of a man terrified of mortality, not one assured of eternal dominion. He did not trust his ideology to live beyond him because there was no ideology to begin with. The final battle at Hogwarts exposed the futility of his approach. When Voldemort appeared, he did not promise mercy or peace or even a new beginning. He simply gave an ultimatum: surrender Harry Potter or die. There is no cause to fight for, he seemed to say, only survival. But people do not fight well for survival alone. They fight best for meaning, and the defenders of Hogwarts had meaning on their side. Even his duel with Harry reflected the hollowness of his reign. "Try for some remorse, Riddle," Harry told him. But Voldemort could not. He had built his identity so thoroughly on domination that to feel remorse would have shattered it, and so he died, not with grandeur, not as a martyr or legend, but as a cautionary tale of what power without purpose looks like. What makes his failure even more glaring is how little it would have taken to gain more ground. If he had offered Muggleborns a place, conditional perhaps but safer than annihilation, many might have joined him out of fear or pragmatism. If he had promised the pure bloods not just survival but glory and restoration of magical prestige, he might have cemented his rule, but he offered only death to the former and degradation to the latter. There was no reward for compliance, only less punishment. His reliance on symbols, like the Dark Mark or Nagini, was similarly empty. The mark, burned into the arms of his followers, summoned them in pain. It did not rally them with pride, and Nagini, though loyal, was no commander or general, only a beast of death, a reminder that betrayal meant consumption. There were no parades, no proclamations, no rites of passage into a better world, only the hush of dread. Tom Riddle, once a boy who charmed teachers and manipulated classmates, had once understood the power of persuasion. As a teenager, he convinced Slughorn to share secrets. He convinced Hepzibah Smith to show him her treasures. He convinced the staff of Hogwarts that he was exemplary, but somewhere along the way he stopped trying to win hearts. He grew so confident in his ability to control through fear that he abandoned the very charisma that once made him dangerous. It is strange, then, that a man so obsessed with control would leave so many cracks in his dominion. But perhaps that is the irony. In refusing to give his followers anything to believe in, Voldemort ensured that no one would truly mourn his fall. The halls of Hogwarts, the corridors of the Ministry, and even the alleys of Nocturne faded quickly from his influence, because fear, while potent, leaves no legacy. His downfall was not only a victory of love over hate or good over evil, it was a victory of meaning over emptiness, of vision over void. Voldemort believed that magic alone made him strong, but in the end it was his refusal to understand the minds of others, their need for hope, for purpose, for something greater, that left him isolated, broken, and ultimately defeated by a boy who had all three. Number 26. Ignoring Hogwarts as a strategic fortress. Of all the strategic failures Lord Voldemort committed during his quest for domination, none stands more glaring, more foolish in retrospect, than his neglect of Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It is not merely a school, it is a stronghold of ancient magical power, layered with centuries-old enchantments, hidden passageways, and legendary artifacts. To ignore it as a critical center of control is to reveal either profound arrogance or astounding blindness, and yet Voldemort, self-proclaimed master of death and magic, did exactly that. He left Hogwarts untouched for far too long, only turning his gaze to it when the tide of war had already begun to shift. Hogwarts had always been more than a place of learning. Founded by the four greatest magical minds of their time, Godric Gryffindor, Helga Hufflepuff, Rowena Ravenclaw, and Salazar Slytherin, it was designed to endure, to protect, to empower. Each founder left behind a legacy, some of which were never fully understood, even by the headmasters who succeeded them. The very walls of the castle were alive with memory and magic. Rooms moved, staircases shifted, ghosts lingered, portraits whispered secrets, and beneath it all the ground pulsed with enchantments laid down over a millennium. To any sensible warlord, it would have seemed the perfect bastion, the perfect seat of control. Yet Voldemort failed to see it. He had every opportunity to make Hogwarts his fortress. His connection to Salazar Slytherin, his ancestor, granted him more intimate access to the castle than any other Dark Lord in history. He alone had opened the Chamber of Secrets and controlled the monster within. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Tom Riddle as a student managed to manipulate the ancient basilisk, unleashing death within the school's walls and nearly succeeding in closing it forever. That same secret passage, that same chamber, could have become a secret lair, a center of surveillance, a deadly prison, or a launching point for conquest. But Voldemort left it dormant for decades. Even when he returned to life, even after gaining full control of his body and army, he did not prioritize Hogwarts. He infiltrated the ministry, he compromised Gringotts, he spread terror through the wizarding world. But the school, sitting in the heart of Scotland, protected by magic so ancient it confused even seasoned Death Eaters, remained free. The question is, why? Voldemort's mind was sharp, cunning, serpentine in its logic. But somehow, in his obsession with fear and power, he failed to see that Hogwarts itself was the ultimate key. Dumbledore understood this well. That is why he never left the school for long. That is why he fortified its boundaries, kept his order nearby, and used the castle as a base of moral and magical resistance. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, he tells Harry, Hogwarts is threatened by every move Voldemort makes. Dumbledore saw what Voldemort refused to. The school was not just a place of protection, it was a symbol of endurance. It nurtured the very generation that would rise up to oppose him. It was a flame of defiance, hidden beneath the illusion of stone and curriculum. There were signs, numerous ones, that Voldemort should have acted differently. His followers among the staff were weak and short-lived. Quirinus Quirrell was a disaster. He crumbled under pressure and fear. Barty Crouch Jr., disguised as Mad-Eye Moody, succeeded in infiltrating the school and even led Harry to Voldemort. But even that opportunity was wasted. Instead of establishing a base inside Hogwarts during the Triwizard Tournament, Voldemort used it merely as bait. He never considered taking the castle itself, never laid roots there. He left it open, unguarded, alive. When he finally did attempt to seize Hogwarts in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, it was far too late. By then, the school had become the final stronghold of resistance. Professors like McGonagall, Flitwick, and Sprout knew every magical defense the place could offer. The Room of Requirement used by Dumbledore's army had become a secret headquarters, its power growing with each use. "We've been hiding here for weeks," Neville Longbottom said, his face battered but proud. Hogwarts had become more than a school. It was a symbol of the last free breath of the magical world. If Voldemort had seized Hogwarts earlier, if he had fortified it before the final battle, the resistance might have been crushed in its cradle. The morale of the wizarding world would have been shattered. Children would have been raised in shadow, trained by Death Eaters, conditioned to obey. Magical education would have become indoctrination. The legacy of the founders would have been twisted into propaganda, and perhaps most dangerously, the magical secrets buried beneath the school, many of which still remain unknown, would have fallen into Voldemort's hands. He could have harnessed the Room of Requirement, which produces whatever the seeker truly needs. He could have turned it into a workshop of weapons, a vault of artifacts, a passage to any part of the castle. He could have mastered the enchantments that protect the castle's boundaries, using them to ward off the Order and the Ministry. He could have sealed the Forbidden Forest, controlled its beasts, used the ghosts to spy, the portraits to report. Instead, he let all of it remain untouched, simmering beneath layers of resistance. And what of the Founder's artifacts? He sought them, yes, but only to desecrate them as horcruxes. He found Hufflepuff's cup, Ravenclaw's diadem, Slytherin's locket, but he never respected what they truly represented. He saw them as vessels, not weapons. He did not study their original purposes, did not wonder what deeper enchantments lay within them. He failed to imagine how those relics might interact with the school itself, how their original energies might have amplified his power had he used them in harmony with Hogwarts, rather than burying them in secrecy. Even the ghosts, nearly Headless Nick, the Grey Lady, the Bloody Baron, could have been resources. The Grey Lady, daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw, held the secret to the diadem's location, but Voldemort coerced her with fear, not respect. He learned where the diadem was, but learned nothing of its magic. His violence blinded him to deeper knowledge. The Baron himself, once feared even by Peeves, was ignored. Voldemort never thought to use the restless spirits that haunted the castle. They had been there for centuries. They knew the castle better than any living soul, but he was too proud to ask. And then there is the matter of the sorting hat. It is no ordinary hat. It contains the wisdom of all four founders. In times of crisis, it summons the Sword of Gryffindor, a goblin-made blade that only appears to those worthy of it. That sword played a pivotal role in Voldemort's downfall. It destroyed multiple horcruxes, and yet Voldemort left it inside Hogwarts, unwatched, unguarded. He did not attempt to corrupt the hat, to bury it, to replace it. He let it remain. He did not see the danger until it was too late. Even Snape, his most valuable asset, was only made headmaster when Voldemort's grip had already tightened around Britain. By then the school was already resisting from within. Students like Neville and Ginny were forming underground armies. Teachers were rebelling in subtle ways. The Carrows, placed there to maintain order, only fueled the fire. Violence begot more defiance. Hogwarts became a powder keg of resistance, waiting for the right moment to explode. Voldemort should have made the school his throne from the beginning. Instead, it became the stage of his final defeat.